morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our House Appropriations Committee meeting. Kathy, can we do roll call, please? Take roll. Sit on this.
Oh, I was waiting for somebody to come up here.
Delegate Austin?
Present.
No, hit yes.
Oh, hit yes.
Quorum is present, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. To you all again, welcome and thank you for joining us. We have 3 presentations this morning, one on early childhood care and education update, the economic and revenue update, and a report on the investigation to the death of a tenant. So at this time, Ms. Jenna Conway, Deputy Superintendent of Early Childhood Care and Education with the Department of Education, will come and give us her presentation.
Good morning. Good morning, Chair Torian, Vice Chair Sickles. I'm Jenna Conway, Deputy Superintendent of Early Childhood at the Department of Education. Can you see my slides? Do I need to press something? Okay, perfect. I am here this morning. Does not appear to be working. Oh, there we go. Is there a way to move the slides? Do they have them? Can I just start to go through them? Or yeah. Okay, if you all have them while we're waiting, I can begin to take you. You don't have them. Okay, perfect. I'll do next slide, please. Always a little technical difficulties as we come back to school and back into meetings. I am here today to present an update on early childhood care and education in the Commonwealth, on access, on quality, and on innovation. What I would like to do is to briefly take you through what we know about enrollment and waitlist as of to date, to also talk about where we are on our quality measurement and improvement work across the state, and then lastly, an update on Ready Together, which is our child care cost sharing pilot out in Southwest Virginia. Next slide, please. One more slide, please. Wanted to briefly touch on what an important session this last General Assembly was for early childhood in the Commonwealth. This body, along with your counterparts in the Senate and with the governor, put forth a historic investment in early childhood care and education. It's important to note that this is not only an important fiscal investment in early childhood slots, but you laid out a framework that impacts how the Department of Education, the Department of Social Services, and the Early Childhood Foundation run these programs across the state. In section 12510 of the education section, you laid out specifically how many slots would fund. You noted that we would sustain all of the slots that exist as of the end of fiscal year 24, and that additional growth would need to be captured through waitlist for the Child Care Subsidy Program, for the Virginia Preschool Initiative, and for the Mixed Delivery Program. You also put in place policy shifts to make sure that parents were contributing their share towards mixed delivery, and that for parents and families that were engaging in full-day, full-year programs, that they would be required to work or be actively looking for work or in school or job training. Along with that, Senate Bill 54 and House Bill 419 laid out a parent choice framework across these options, making sure that the department was soliciting kind of how many slots would be needed each year based on actual usage and parent choice, reallocating those slots in alignment with that parent choice by July 1st, establishing wait lists, and then if there is sufficient funding, making sure that that funding would not be left on the table, but would be reallocated based on family preference. Next slide, please. What we know 2.5 months into the fiscal year is that we continue to see significant unmet parental demand for all 3 state-funded programs. Actual data from child care subsidy and mixed delivery, which is our full day, full year options in private settings in child care and in family child care, suggests that upwards of 2/3 of parents are seeking that type of full day, full year. This aligns with what we know about the number or the higher percentage of kids under the age of 6 in the Commonwealth who have all available parents in the workforce and Virginia's very low unemployment levels. We also see that there is some growth in demand for Virginia preschool initiative across the board, including for 3-year-olds, but this tends to be a slightly lower growth rate than what we see in child care subsidy. And as a result, again, there is a tremendous commitment to serve all of the kids that were being served in fiscal year 24. But as you look over multiple fiscal years, you see that different areas of the state were at different areas of growth. And so when I share the waitlist data, what that reveals in part is where there was rapidly growing kind of demand for childcare. And then when we stopped on July 1st, as required by the budget and law, that some of those places are experiencing higher wait lists than other areas of the state because of the growth. It could be economic growth. It could be sort of demographic shifts that's occurring within those regions. Next slide, please. Let's talk a little bit about what we know about wait lists for each of these programs. If we could move to the next slide, please. This is the child care subsidy program. Again, you funded 42,719 slots. So you made a commitment to the Commonwealth last year that every child and family that came forth by June 30th would be served and would sustain their slot for the year. What we know as of July 1st, from July 1st until September 1st, that across the state, about 7,666 children came onto wait list. About 40% of those are infants and toddlers, 30% are preschool, and the remainder are school age. Child care subsidy serves birth to 13. School age are only eligible for part-time. It cannot be a replacement for private school, so only kind of before and after school. We know that 93 of 120 localities have a wait list, roughly about 80%, and we see this as sort of growing week over week. If there is attrition, if families leave the program, then you are able to refill that slots, and we're working very closely with Commissioner Williams and the Department of Social Services, as well as our local offices, to make sure that as soon as a slot goes vacant, that it's filled. But again, what you see is overall, there's just more and more families seeking a child care subsidy. Next slide, please. For mixed delivery, as a reminder, mixed delivery is also full day, full year in private settings. The vast majority are childcare, some are family childcare. These are contracted slots, and we work in partnership with the Ready Regions to open these classrooms. As you funded last year, 2,530 slots, and as of September 1st, all 9 Ready Regions have wait lists with a total of 2,104 children on those wait lists. Mixed delivery is only birth to 5, and you'll see it's about a 50-50 split between the children who are infants and toddlers on that wait list and preschool. As a reminder, all of these families are working and are actual families that are seeking these services. Next slide, please. Together, we wanted to take a look at this demand together, because this collectively represents the demand from working families under roughly 85% of the state median income across the Commonwealth. As you see across the board, we have significant demand across those together. It's a wait list of just under 10,000 children, of which 2/3 are birth to 5, and roughly 20% or so are school age. Next slide, please. When we look at this data by region, there's a couple of important trends to highlight. So what this bar graph does is take the raw numbers of the children on wait lists across each of our 9 Ready Regions, from Southwest to Blue Ridge. It then shows you for each of the programs the different age groups. And then it also shows you kind of to get a per capita sense of the impact of the wait list. That number in the light blue box is if you take the number of children on the wait list and divide it by the total demand, which would be the slots plus the wait list. So you see kind of demographic differences here, or some per capita differences here. A couple of important trends. One, we have wait lists for full day, full year for working families in every region of the state and of every age. You also see that we have quite a range from 6% of demand in wait lists upwards to a state high of 23% in Southwest. When I noted earlier that we think that communities or regions rather came into the kind of the closing of the slots on July 1st that those different rates of growth are driving some of the different per capita impact that you see articulated in those light blue boxes. If you can move to the next slide, this gives you kind of how it compares to the statewide average. So if we look at statewide waitlist as a percentage of demand, you see it's 18% statewide. You'll see green boxes below that. Yellow box is close to that, west, south side, and southeastern. And then the remaining 5 regions from southwest to Chesapeake Bay are slightly above that state average. We also looked at the Virginia Preschool Initiative. Again, the framework that this body put forth requires us across the board to understand what unmet demand is and to require all of our state-funded programs to have wait lists. We see a slightly different set of trends around VPI, and so we've included some historical data to help articulate this. Officially, when we solicited information from school divisions, they said that there might be upwards of 8,900 children on wait lists. That's a lot of kids. We wonder whether or not that might be an aspirational reflection of what they'd want to serve. And the reason that we suggest that is if you look at the historical data, this chart includes FY23, FY24, and FY25. What you see is that school divisions have historically requested more slots than they end up serving. So, and for the last 2 years, you provided sufficient funding for every single slot that was requested. But in FY23, the field requested 26,000 slots, and they only served about 22,000. In FY24, they requested just under 27,000 slots, and they served about 23,000. So you see some growth, but because of that delta between how many requested and how many were slots, we left upwards between $20 and $30 million on the table each of these years and the last 2 years. As a result, and I want to give credit to Zach and the wonderful team, the House Appropriations staff came up with a recommendation for this body, which you embraced, of really funding VPI based on actuals. So you funded about 25,000 slots this year. More were requested, and as I noted before, they're on the wait list. But as we see with fall enrollment, we'll see how closely we come into that number of just about 25,000 kids and families who are actually interested in pursuing VPI this year. With that, I want to switch for a moment and switch to a focus on quality. So the General Assembly, including some of the patrons in this room, passed a law in 2020 that did 3 important things for early childhood. 1, it unified and consolidated early childhood at the Department of Education to create more of a kind of focus on education and quality. 2, it required a statewide measurement and improvement system. And 3, it created an early childhood advisory committee to the board. Since then, we've been working with our partners across the state, stakeholders across the state, to implement VQB5, which is a nation-leading quality measurement and improvement system. We took 2 years to practice with the field, giving folks the ability to opt in and participate. As a reminder, this includes every early childhood program: family child care, Head Start, early childhood special education, VPI, if they take public dollars. So it's only if you take public dollars. You can opt in if you don't take public dollars, but you're only required if you take public dollars. This fall, in about a month's time, we will roll out our VQB5 online portal, which will include quality ratings for just over 3,200 sites across the state, reflecting the quality of the classroom experiences across 11,000 classrooms. These quality profiles will include specific classroom measures, so looking at what kids are experiencing. These measures are predictive of kids' learning and growth towards school readiness, as well as the use of curriculum. They have more than 70 curriculum choices, but we want to make sure that they're intentionally promoting learning and development. It will also include important demographic information for families, like address, hours, where they are on a map. We've worked with the field and more than 1,800 stakeholders over the course of the last year to develop this online portal. Next slide, please. This gives you a sense of the penetration statewide. Blue are centers, orange is family day homes, and red is public schools. So through the collective work of the foundation, the Ready Regions, the Department of Education, Social Services, and thousands of child care providers, family child care providers, and schools and Head Start partners across the state, we observed 29,000 classrooms. We know that over 80% of sites are using a quality curriculum, and as you see from this map, there's a publicly funded option in every city and county in the Commonwealth. Last but not least, this gives you a sense of what that online website will look like, or that online portal, the website will look like when it comes out in early October. A real opportunity for Virginia to feature and put information at parents' fingertips about the publicly funded options and what they can expect to experience for their children, and helping them to choose the best option for their families. Last but not least, I'm pleased to, in partnership with the Virginia Early Childhood Foundation and EO, which is the Ready region out in Southwest Virginia, just provide a brief update on a really innovative cost-sharing pilot. So taking some of the mixed delivery funding and exploring ways to make it go further, the Early Childhood Foundation, Ready Region Southwest, which the lead agency is EO, and Ballot Health have developed Ready Together, an innovative public-private cost-sharing model. What this enables us to do is take a certain number of slots with mixed delivery and make them go further by having the employer, in addition to the state, and the parent contribute. The employer in the pilot is Ballot Health. There are 2 sites in Norton and Abingdon, and we have roughly about 52 Ballot employees and their families. Next slide, please. The way it works, it's a 3-payer model, and looked at kind of other examples of this across the country, but having the employer, who also benefits from their employee having high quality, sustainable, stable childcare, contributes a portion. The employee contributes a kind of a parent copayment, and then the state makes up the difference. This gives you a sense of kind of how that breakdown works. You'll see slightly different cost factors for infants and toddlers, but the employer pays the same kind of across the board, roughly $5,000 per slot. The family pays $2,000 per slot per year, and the state, again, addresses the difference, anywhere between $6,000 per slot up to just under $15,000 per slot. What this enables Ready Together, what it enables this community to do, is to serve 18 more slots than were initially allocated, or 68% more children, by soliciting that employer contribution to make the state dollars go further. This is a relatively new pilot. If we can move to the next slide, and we're already learning lots of lessons. We have huge thank you to Ready Region Southwest, EO, and Ballot, who have come to the table and are figuring out how we can engage families, how do we make the economics work, how do we develop these partnerships. It has taken time. We expect to fill all of these slots by September 30th, but kind of understanding preferences, working with parents, working with families, working with employers, and we're excited about the success and would be happy to come back to this body as we go further along with this pilot. With this, Chairman Torian, I will pause and take any questions you might have from the committee.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Delegate Creasack.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The question I have is, in the very beginning, when you were talking about the waiting list, how long are some of these kids on the waiting list?
That's a great question. So the question is the length of the wait list. So right now, it is a very dynamic factor. They can sit on the wait list as long as needed, until a slot comes available. We have not, because of what this body did in the prior biennial budget, had any wait lists across any programs for the last 2 years. So we don't know right now, Delegate, how long they will sit on there, but they can sit on there indefinitely. And we will be watching to see how much attrition is occurring, and then sort of understanding how much of that wait list might reduce. So it goes up and it goes down. But in general, the attrition rate is much lower than the increasing demand rate.
Delegate Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in regards to wait lists, something came to mind as I was looking at this. And first of all, I'm so excited about what we've done. We have all these wonderful children that are participating in this, and it's a benefit to the state. Having said that, I do have a question around the wait list, and then, of course, the children that are participating in this. Do we have any measures in place to acknowledge attendance for the folks that are actually participating but maybe are not, taking full advantage of this, important?
Absolutely. So we do, right now, Virginia still has a pay-by-attendance policy. We are required ultimately, roughly within a 2-year period, as per the federal regulations, to move to a pay-by-enrollment. But right now we do pay by attendance, and we offer some limited attendance days for when kids are sick or there's other kind of family situations, we can get that specific data for you. But there are right now, if a child misses more than those attendance days, they are not paid for those. We are required to provide a family with 12 months of the program according to the federal regulations. And so we continue to work with providers to kind of track where attendance is off. The vast majority of our kids are not using all of those attendance days right now, but we think that's partly because it's an attendance, there are some attendance incentives right now.
Thank you.
Delegate Austin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I have a question, and that would be, I see school-age children getting early childhood learning slots. And how many children are we talking about, and what ages and how much early childhood money goes to those school-age children in those slots?
That's a great question, Delegate. So the way that the federal child care subsidy program, it does allow you to go up to age 13, up to age 18 for children with special needs, although that's a very, very, very small population. Virginia continues to serve a large number. In fiscal year 24, our unduplicated number was close to 19,000 school-age children, mostly after school and summer programming, and our expenditures were roughly $95 million. So it's about a quarter of the program. They're less expensive, so you sort of see kind of compared to birth to 5, but the other challenge, as you noted, is that all of our accountability efforts are focused on birth to 5. So those programs, while they are licensed for health and safety, there's actually not a quality measurement per se, in the same way that we know for all of the birth to 5 children served in the programs, because of EQB5, we can say with specificity to you all, here's exactly what you're getting for those investments. But statewide, it's about 19,000 children total. At any given point in time, it's about between 11 and 13,000 children, and there's about a $95 million spend.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, follow up.
Delegate Austin.
Comment, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, this is a great program, but I would hope that we would encourage the people who have children of school age that they attend school, and we open those slots up. I mean, it's really necessary for people to have child care in order to work, and the school system could be providing some of that daytime child care to free up some of these slots. But thank you very much, and this is a phenomenal program. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other questions? Delegate Moorfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you refer to the last slide on your presentation on the Virginia Preschool Initiative, I noticed that the City of Petersburg wait list, you have 556 and unmet request of 46. And I noticed just with the localities in Southwest Virginia, there were a number of localities in Southwest Virginia that have wait lists reported of 0. And one, Buchanan County, has a wait list reported of 0 and an unmet request of 0. The socioeconomic statistics are very similar to the City of Petersburg, as well as a number of localities in Southwest Virginia. So I guess the question that I have is, why are those 0?
So these are the requests that come, or the data that comes directly from school divisions. And so I know for one point, I think school divisions in the Southwest Virginia have made sort of substantial investments and or may have space available. And so they might be serving everybody that they actually have the capacity to serve and don't necessarily have any waitlist coming from families. In sharp contrast, I think, and that's for the academic year, right? So VPI it looks different from child care subsidy and mixed delivery, which do full day, full year. We also know that some of those other areas of state, about half of the wait lists came from about 5 school divisions across, or communities across the state. And those are places that may not have made some of the kind of expansion efforts in recent years, are citing space issues or staffing issues. But the variation in the VPI wait list and request is all coming directly from the 128 school divisions that currently offer VPI.
Thank you.
Delegate Corner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to add a little bit of additional context. Mr. Chairman, you did send to the Early Childhood Care and Education Commission several of the budget requests that came before this committee, as well as bills that came before this committee that all would impact different aspects of early childhood. And Delegate Bulova, Delegate Hayes, and Delegate Campbell all serve on that, so you are well represented by your appropriations team there. I think one of the things that I would add to what Ms. Conway said, when we look at the wait list, they are real kids, right? There aren't like possible kids. The wait list are actual working families in Virginia who have a need and would qualify. They just don't have an opportunity right now. And when you couple that with our record unemployment, when you couple that with our median household income as the Commonwealth rising, it really boils down to this particular area not being able to adequately care for families who cannot afford childcare and housing, and you add to the list without some help. So we will have a report to you, Mr. Chairman, by October 1st with our response to some of the questions that we were asked to tackle this year, which part of that is the job piece that we were asked to look at, as well as the cost sharing. But it is very, very difficult in this area without everybody, both parents, localities, and the state coming together to figure this out for working families.
Delegate McQuinn.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I think that the conversation in terms of the data collection has come mainly from schools. Are there any attempts being made to receive the data from, child care centers and churches and communities, especially in light of this large waiting list that we have, to see if slots are available and I guess us coordinating with them to provide, services to those who are on the wait list. And so I don't know what we're doing in that realm. So, and the other piece, are we, since it's such a demand, are we doing anything to help address that in terms of, say, there's a need for child care center? Who's qualified, training people for that purpose, or training those who may be interested in establishing, child care centers. So if you would speak to that, I appreciate it.
So, and my apologies if I wasn't clear. I think there's sort of three sets of wait lists here. The first one for the child care subsidy program and mixed delivery, none of that is through schools. Those are explicitly working families who are either going to their local social services office or going to the provider, and saying, I am eligible. These are, I think, to Delegate Coiner's point, folks who have come in, completed the paperwork, showed the documentation that they're working, demonstrated that they're income eligible. And as noted earlier, I think it's a really important trend for Virginia that now 2/3 of your families are saying, this is what we need, relative to years past where it was, I think, a more equal split with VPI. We also know from school divisions that nearly 1,000 families turned down VPI slots last year because they needed, a longer duration, that kind of full day, full year for working purposes. So it was just the kind of VPI that's from the school divisions. We, when it comes to kind of these wait lists, many of them have already found a spot or might be on kind of like a know what program they want to go to. They just can't afford it without the child care subsidy, without the voucher, right? And so that's kind of the difference. You all saw as it grew, if you'll remember, the last biennial budget said grow based on parent demand. So we would, anywhere they had additional parent demand, we would provide vouchers, and those parents and the private sector were able to kind of keep up supply. At some point, that would run out, right? And I think there would be an issue around, do we have enough supply? I would note to Delegate Campbell's point, though, We are at historic high. We just hit last month 3,000 providers, private businesses, nonprofits, family child care and child care who are taking child care subsidy, which is a historic high for the Commonwealth, even with the higher accountability and measurement improvements. But we continue to tackle, Delegate, that supply issue. We have navigators who are kind of helping folks get licensed and get registered, particularly in family child care, which makes a lot of sense for both everywhere from Northern Virginia, right, where kind of there's a scarcity of space, to Southwest Virginia, right, where there's a broader geographic distribution, making sure that there is sort of sufficient supply. But the pinch in the system right now is you have families who found a spot but can't take advantage of that spot because they just cannot afford the out-of-pocket cost without some kind of subsidy. All of those parents, unless they're very low income, are making a copay. They just can't afford the full cost.
Thank you. Delegate Campbell, do you have a follow-up? I see you.
No, sir, sorry.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? None? Okay. Ms. Conway, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Our next presenter will be Secretary Cummings.
Clicker's not working, so you just need to say next slide. Okay. All right, good. Chairman Toya and Vice Chairman Sickles, members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to present today. I'm here to talk about the monthly revenues for the month of August. What you will see is I won't say it's a boring month. Every month is important, but outside of withholding and sales and use tax, the rest of the receipts are pretty minor in the overall scheme of things. So some big percentages you'll see, but not necessarily big numbers. So if you could advance the slide, please. Despite having one fewer deposit day than in August of last year, revenues increased 2% year over year for the month of August. For the first 2 months, revenues are up 8% over last year. August, like July, is another relatively low revenue month. It's primarily withholding and sales and use taxes. Other sources are really not significant. Those two main sources actually accounted for 90% of the monthly revenues, whereas for the year, they would generally account for closer to 80%, just to give you an idea of how that stacks up. As you all know, we're very concentrated in withholding and sales and use as a Commonwealth. Compared to the forecast, which does account for the reduced number of days in the month, deposit days in the month, revenues exceeded projections by $114 million, and year-to-date, we're ahead for 2 months by $205.7 million. I want to make sure everybody does understand the term forecast now. Because for FY 2025, we are still using the forecast that was developed in the fall of 2023, the December forecast. As you all know, at the end of budget negotiations, we put another $500 million plus into the budget to close the deal. That was just an impact for 2024. So we're going back to FY 2024 December forecast as our comparison. So that means that fiscal year 2025 revenue forecast reflects what was going on in the fall, which was, for those of you who are on GACR, a pretty conservative outlook, and relative to the GACR meeting we just had, where I think people have I wouldn't say rosy, but a more sanguine view about where the economy is at the moment. This forecast will obviously be updated in the coming months and delivered in December. Among the major sources, payroll withholding is 1.3% lower year over year for the month, reflecting the one less deposit day. Interestingly, it happens to be a Thursday, which in a weekly cycle, Thursdays are the big days when bigger numbers come in. And it's up 6.1% year to date. Compared to the forecast, which does account for the deposit day not being in there, we are ahead by $158 million in withholding. August non-withholding collections increased 53% year over year, and they're $100 million ahead of forecast year to date. Sales taxes increased 1.8% in August. They're up 2.2% year to date. Fiscal year to date sales and use revenues are $21 million above projections. Corporate income tax collections were negative $15.2 million for the month of August, reflecting refund activity when few taxpayers actually submit estimated payments. So again, a small base, it's a big percentage difference from what we had expected, but not something that we're concerned about at this point in time. And that's because September is a big collection month when estimated payments come in across the board, and we'll get a better idea of truly where we stand year to date. Next slide, please. Talking about the economy for a minute. Economy continues to chug along, as we all can see. Consumers are spending, inflation is nearing the Fed target, and employment growth continues to slow. Still positive, but it is slowing. Real GDP for the U.S. was revised upward to 3% annual rate the second calendar quarter for 2024. I think the big news is that tomorrow the Fed is widely expected to lower interest rates at its meeting. Tune in at 2 p.m. tomorrow to hear what is now becoming like the Super Bowl that everybody tunes in. It does. The Fed Chair Powell did express in his remarks last month that confidence in inflation being under control as it's getting close to the 2% target, suggesting that interest rate cuts are imminent, and emphasized the Fed's intent to focus on maintaining a strong labor market. That's really what is that got everybody's interest. I think right now the debate is not if, it's about how much. Current fixed income market odds reflected in futures say that 70% chance of a 50 basis point cut, which I think we all know if that's the case, they want to make sure they stay ahead of a job market that's softening. So that'd be a very interesting indicator tomorrow. I think 50 basis points probably would not be what the chair would prefer to do, where there's more of a gradual adjustment to things. So I think that would be an interesting message. Headline CPI for all items fell to 2.5% in August. Core CPI 3.2%. But the number that the Fed primarily focuses on, PCE, Personal Consumption Expenditure Price Index, held steady at 2.6%. The U.S. added 142,000 jobs in August, which is a good number, but clearly slowing. And July's the last month we have data for Virginia, where we added 4,800 jobs, 2% increase over last year. If you could please advance the slide. Looking at GDP, it came in at 3%, according to revised estimates released last month. That's more than double the rate of growth in the first quarter. Consumer spending continues to hold up, and it's the largest contributor to GDP at 1.95% of that 3%. Recent data shows a small but real uptick in consumer sentiment, which is important. That's what's driving our economy, and does come as mortgage rates slightly reduce, gas prices are down, and inflation continues to cool, showing that consumer sentiment in the Michigan survey ticked up a bit in the last month. Next slide. This is a chart you've seen forever, just showing the positive trends in inflation and giving confidence to the Fed that we do have things under control. They have things under control in this category. Next slide. Job growth continues to slow. I think emphasize it is still positive, but watching job openings and the overall trend of job growth. Non-farm payrolls rose by 142,000, which was a tad weaker than expectations, but an improvement from July. We're going to talk about revisions in a minute. And across industries, this is for the U.S., leisure and hospitality were up 46,000, construction up 34,000, healthcare up 31,000, jobs and manufacturing down by 24,000. Number of job openings is ticking down. That's been a consistent trend as well, and it's the lowest level since January of 2021. Next slide. This is important as the revisions we've been hearing about. We've had consistent negative revisions. Throughout the year, there are moments when they step back and they look at this, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and you can see here that before the revision, we were at 157 million jobs, U.S. total non-farm jobs, reduced by 818,000 in the latest revision, down 0.5%, which is a significant margin of difference. Virginia only down 0.2%. I think everyone's reading about this, that we've had consistent downward revisions. A lot of people have different views of why that's happening. if you look back in history, you'll find when jobs are going, when the world is softening, you tend to have consistent downward revisions. On the other side, when you have jobs strengthening, you have consistent job increases in the number of jobs. So not terribly surprising. What it does do is it causes meaningful doubt on this 142,000, that people are kind of assuming that that number probably is more like something under 100,000 jobs. So watched, but not really something that people react to immediately in the market. Next slide, please. Virginia added 4,800 jobs in July. Our unemployment rate 2.7%. So Virginia continues to be quite strong. That right-hand side, I think, is a great indicator of what's going on in Virginia. I think I had a question with Senate Finance and Appropriations Committee of inability to fill jobs still in Northern Virginia. And I think when you see a 2.7 unemployment rate, that's a good thing in respect. It indicates a challenge for those who are trying to fill jobs. So it's one of those double-edged swords. Next chart. This is unemployment jobless claims. And it's showing over a long period of time. The left-hand slide shows back to, I think, 2009. And it shows that what happened in pandemic. And it's now the cutout box in that left-hand slide is blown up on the right. And it will show you statistically that we are up 20% over prior year on jobless claims. But if you put your eyes back on the left-hand side, we're not in a red alert phase here in the overall context of where things normally are going back over 15 years. But it's clearly something we'll watch, and Secretary Slater and his team are keeping us posted on weekly results that they're seeing, just to make sure we've got a close eye on that. Next slide, please. This is really important. Charles Kennington and myself had the chance to spend time on the phone with President Barkin of the Richmond Fed before they went into blackout last week. And this is really important indicator of where our economy is. The consumer is driving our economy. It needs to continue to drive our economy. And you can see here that we're at 5.3% on personal consumption, 5.3% year over year in July. Retail sales growing at 2.7%. So this is one that we talk about jobs. He would put this as top of the list of the other indicator that we should be watching. And the consumer continues to hold up. Next slide. Home sales. Again, I think we all know we're dealing with lower numbers given the cost of housing and the cost of a move for people who don't need to make a move. But there are positive indicators here, and just, again, something we'll watch, but not something that's going to be, at this level, not going to be driving the economy in and of itself. I think interesting here is the median price of home sales in 24 versus 23. And I think we all know the upper end of the market is still in decent shape. It's the people who are trying to find first homes and moving at lower income levels that it really continues to be a meaningful challenge with where rates are. Next slide. So looking at the numbers, you can see we are on the left-hand side for the month of August. If you look at total GF revenues, we are 2% up year over year for total revenues. If you take your eyes up that same column and change, withholding is down 1.3%. Again, we have one less deposit day, and that would account for that. So we're I guess in a theoretical adjusted month, we're still positive, but it's not at a meaningful level. And then on sales and use taxes, we're up 1.8% year over year as well, which is a good thing. And then if you look at FY 2025 for August, just to emphasize what's going on, if you look at the top line withholding of $1,336 million, and then sales and use taxes of just about $400 million, and you look at that's $1.7 billion, $1.8 billion, and out of $1.964 billion for the month. So again, making it clear those other categories just are not doing a lot to contribute to the overall month. Year to date, bottom right, we're up 8%. Withholding is up 6%. We had an extra big day in July, so that contributed there. And all in all, we were up 8% year over year. And on to the next slide, You can see that number on the far right. We are up 5.3% versus projections, versus our forecast. Again, a stale forecast, not reflecting current perspectives on where the economy is, but positive because we're up $206 million versus the forecast that is the basis of our current appropriations that we have in place. So that's good news for us that we're starting out ahead of the game. Next slide, I'm going to go through these quickly. These are standard slides. It'll be more meaningful as we get farther into the year, but the hash mark columns are what our forecast represents. You can see how things do bump around and that we are ahead. Next slide is non-withholding. This is just the non-withholding, no refunds counted, which is going to be capital gains and small business S-corps partnerships. And as we've said last year, that number, not surprisingly given what's going on in the market, has been running ahead of a conservative forecast. So we're not, we're not counting that because there's a lot of volatility in this as well of when people actually make estimated payments, and not reflected here yet. Next page, please. Income refunds. This is going back through FY 2021. We've added, Charles and his team, the revenue team, have added now since the beginning of this last fiscal year a tracking of PTET payments to help us sort that out in the midst of all of our refunds. Again, the main point is August is a small month. You can look at, we will see bigger numbers. The bulk of that gain takes place in October, November, but really February, March, and April on refunds. So August is not a meaningful contributor to that. Next page is sales tax. Again, and you can see here our sales tax forecast we have going into August and through next March. Remember, that forecast was premised on a moving into a mild recession in the tail end of FY24 that would last 6 to 9 months. And this would be reflected in a weaker sales consumer demand period of time in that downturn. So we're going to have, looking at where we are right now, we're going to have some good months to compare ourselves to, which should continue to expand the beat of the current forecast that's in our budget process. Next slide, please. Other sources, just suffice it to say, they're not meaningful. They're kind of some up, some down, but not something at this point in time that we really are tracking very closely. Next page and final page. Again, August is not a significant month for revenues, consisting mainly of withholding and sales and use taxes. We're up 8% year for the first 2 months, $303 million year over year. Compared to our forecast for the same 2 months, we're up $205.7 million. Virginia economy continues to be strong. We're definitely benefiting in a quote unique way relative to the rest of the country. I think it's reflected in the financial performance that we've all enjoyed for the last 12 to 24 months. The Fed is going to be really interesting tomorrow. We're going to get a rate cut. It's a question of how much. And obviously, as we talked about within Gaker, I think that meeting, as I said before, was a pretty positive tone. But typically, we try to wrap it up with, so what do you really think is going to happen? And the governor said, we're not even going to ask you because we know we've got some important events happening here before we get together in November, most importantly, the elections. And let's just pause and wait till that happens, and then we can all talk about what we think and what the implications of that outcome is. Mr. Chair, that concludes my remarks. I'm open for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Are there any questions for the Secretary? Delegate Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Secretary, one of the things we track every month is the unemployment rate, but we don't see what the participation rate is. Could you give that information to us and start?
Yeah, we typically had it, and you're right, it's dropped out. It still is at holding, do you know, 66? Yeah, we're still hanging in where it is, but we'll get to that. We did drop it out of the presentation this time. We've had it, but it's still very positive, better than the U.S., and the recovery rate has been maintained.
So did I hear it was 2/3 of the people that can work are working, and we are better than the U.S.?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yep.
Delegate Cresack.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Secretary, so the governor has always been included in all of his forecasts that I can remember, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, a mild recession coming at some point in the near future. From the way you're discussing that old forecast, you pretty much jettison that, and that is, am I correct in assuming that that is not something that you forecast yourself personally?
I would say that the Gaker wrap-up was that we're not expecting a recession in the future, but we have the elections to look at and what that means for the economy, and that could change people's perspective. That was a very consistent perspective. It's kind of an economy that chugs along, not too warm, not too cold kind of a outlook, but not a recessionary view.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Campbell.
In regards to the 5.3 consumer spending number, which is really exciting to see that is up, I'm just curious, is that truly demand, or do we take into account that the cost of spending and the cost of goods for people in the Commonwealth is up?
That would be captured in that as well, but it still is absolutely a positive demand on top of that.
Okay.
Right. Good question.
Okay, any other questions? No, Mr. Secretary, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, our last report is from Ms. Miller.
So it won't work, so I have to say next slide to you. All right, got it. I don't like not being in control. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thanks so much for having me. I'm Colleen Miller. Is this not working? Okay, thank you. I'm Colleen Miller. I'm the Executive Director of the Disability Law Center of Virginia. Before we get to who DLCV is, I want to make sure you all know who Irvo Otieno is. He was a young man experiencing a mental health crisis, which is not an infrequent occurrence in the Commonwealth of Virginia. He had a very creative side to him. He loved music. He loved to create music and to perform music. You should know that he was deeply loved by his family. After we issued our report, his mother called us to make sure that we understood just how deep a loss they all felt since his death, and to make sure that we understood that this was something, in their view, that cannot continue in Virginia. And so we're really grateful for the chance to be here with you all today to figure out if there's some way that we can take some steps to prevent something like this from happening again. Some of you have worked with us in the past, but for those of you who are not familiar with us, let me just tell you, the Disability Law Center of Virginia is a nonprofit organization. We are not a state agency. We are a creature of federal law, which gives us our investigative authority, but we've also been recognized by the legislature as the state's protection and advocacy system. So we're created in Virginia code to perform the work that we do. Our mission is to promote independence and choice for people with disabilities, to particularly advance their legal rights and protect their legal rights, and to do work to eliminate abuse and neglect of people with disabilities. And that is probably the most significant part of our mandate, and it is what drove us to conduct this investigation into the death of Mr. Otieno. You can do the next slide, thank you. I hope you've had a chance to see that report. I know some of you have had a chance to see the report. It is a hard read. I will tell you that right now. It requires a fair amount of putting it down and walking away from it from time to time. But in the end, we conclude, after looking at the events of the last few days of Mr. Otieno's life, that there is serious reform needed in Virginia because the events that happened to Mr. Otieno resulted in his death. and it got a lot of media attention. But people with mental illness are encountering these same issues every single day in Virginia, and we really need to do something about it. We need to take some action to end the criminalization of mental illness, to have people with mental illness be responded to by somebody other than law enforcement. We need really to address the conditions in jails where thousands of people with mental illness are being kept. And those places, the jail community would tell you that they are not equipped to deal with serious mental illness. They're being tasked with something that they simply cannot take. We need to really do some hard thinking about how to protect people to get the treatment that they have been found to need. We're going to look at the events in Mr. Otieno's life and see that time and time again, the treating professionals that you all picked to be in this role found that he needed treatment for his serious mental illness, and he was blocked from getting that treatment time and time again. And then finally, the thing that actually led to his death, the prone restraint, it's prohibited in our state facilities. And yet, at Central State Hospital, he was placed face down, people piled on top of him, and killed him. So we need to figure out how we can really eliminate the use of prone restraint. So I thought the best way for us to kind of look at the need for these reforms is if we go through the timeline of the events of his last few days. Because of the authority that we have created by the federal government, we were able to access a lot of different investigative sources. We did not get everything that we wanted. There were a couple of entities who did not cooperate with us. But we did look at reports from Parham Doctors Hospital, from the Henrico County Jail, from the Community Services Boards, and from Central State Hospital. We looked at the videos that many of you saw on TV and some other videos that have been produced since then, and put this all together to construct the timeline of what happened in the last few days of his life. Who's controlling? There we go. So the first thing that didn't get a lot of attention is that the day before the really events happened is that Mr. Otieno did have an encounter with the police. A neighbor called the police, said he was acting erratically. The police came. We don't know whether this encounter had any kind of impact on the stuff that happened the next day or not, but it does kind of set it up for understanding why there was such tension between Mr. Otieno and law enforcement. So in our report, we said that on March 3rd that Mr. Otieno's mother called the police. That was one of the things she called to correct after our report was issued. She did not call the police. It was a neighbor who called the police. But she said that what was happening was that she had gone out to get something out of her car. He followed her out there and then got confused and went into a neighbor's house and tried to enter a neighbor's house. And that's when the neighbor called. So the police respond, and he is agitated in response to the police. So they take him under what's called an emergency custody order, and they take him to Parham Doctors Hospital. The Community Services Board, which is the entity that you have all designated as being the responsible party for figuring out whether somebody needs additional treatment or not, they evaluate him and find, yes, he needs hospitalization. He is either a danger to himself or others, or he is at risk of deterioration. The next step is to find a hospital bed, but as they are waiting for this hospital bed, the hospital administers medication for him. Throughout these reports, we are seeing that when he's dealing with the EMTs, when he's dealing with hospital staff, he is not fighting them. He is resistant, doesn't want a shot, but he is not aggressive with them. It is only when the police are encountering him that he gets really agitated. So later that afternoon, he's in the hospital, and the police are in his room. There's some debate about what they're doing in his room, but he's getting more and more agitated as the police are in there. As he gets more agitated, the hospital gives him additional antipsychotic medication, and they then evaluate him, and they find that he is not being aggressive, but he is being sort of like verbally resistant. He's making threats to the police in resistance to their presence there. But he's not throwing anything. He's not hurting anybody. The Community Service Board evaluates him again and says he needs treatment. They ask for a temporary detention order. That temporary detention order never makes it to the hospital. So he's agitated. The police have entered his room. We're not sure why the police are in his hospital room, but they are holding him down while the hospital staff try to administer additional medication. And he strikes out at the police, which then causes him to be arrested. He has hit a police officer. So they take him to jail. I was gonna add some commentary there, but I decided not to. They take him to jail and they restrain him immediately on getting him to the jail. They put him in what's called a restraint chair. And a restraint chair all by itself can be very dangerous. You are kind of caved in on yourself while you are in that restraint chair. It makes it difficult to breathe. There are states that prohibit the use of the restraint chair completely. The correctional standards for the use of any kind of restraints, but particularly a restraint chair, require that someone be restrained only as long as necessary, only while they are acting out. And we will see that Mr. Otieno is restrained for at a minimum 11 hours, we can tell, but maybe as much as 2 days. He is in a restraint chair, unable to move. Next slide. So again, the agency that you have determined should make this evaluation visits Mr. Otieno and says, yes, he needs hospitalization. And again, he does not get that hospitalization. Mid-morning on March 4th, he's been there now for an overnight period, at least 11 hours at this point. Mid-morning, they relieve these restraints one at a time to allow him to just stretch his limbs a little bit, and then they place him back in restraints again. Next slide. So finally, they do reach the magistrate. The magistrate issues a new temporary detention order, and he remains in jail for several hours. He is in a restraint chair. He's been in a restraint chair, we think, now for almost a full day at this point, and is, maybe not surprisingly, aggressive about it, really complaining about having been restrained that long. So the next day comes, and the Community Services Board at this point says that there are no available beds for Mr. Otieno. We will note that at this point in March of 2023, there are 158 people in the state hospital system who have been declared ready for discharge. So the fact that there are no hospital beds available is a failure of the ability to move people out of the hospitals when they no longer need to be there. It is not a need for more hospital beds. It is a need for better community services so that people can get out when it's time for them to get out. That afternoon, the afternoon of March 5th, is the first time that the records show that he's been released from the emergency restraint chair. The records are not really clear whether he had been released from it earlier than that or not. But it looks at this point that it's been close to 2 days that he's been in a restraint chair. Next slide. He hasn't eaten, and he is refusing medications. So we're on now yet another day, and he still hasn't eaten. And so the correctional officers at the jail are trying to force him to eat. And in the course of forcing that tray on him, a fight breaks out. We can see the video of that officers are actually punching him in response to that fight. And this is the event that eventually causes him to be transported to Central State Hospital. Next slide. So 6 officers pick him up, some carrying him by the belt, some by limbs, and carry him out of the jail and put him into the van. It doesn't, throughout all of this, it does not really look like he is fighting this transportation. He is resisting the way he's being treated, but it doesn't look like he's fighting the transportation. They get him to Central State Hospital and again carry him by the belt, by the arms and legs, carry him into the hospital where he resists. And at that point, the sheriff's deputies and several hospital staff hold him down, face down on the ground. Go ahead. His hands and his feet are already in shackles. But they're holding him face down at that point. They try to remove his restraints. He's responding badly to the police being there. As they're putting him down, they put him on the floor. They get him into his prone position, hold him down on the ground, and hold him down with some of the sheriff's deputies actually sitting on top of him. Next slide. At this point, Central State Hospital, and it's an interesting question here, Central State Hospital has given an order for medication. We think at this point the hospital is assuming that they have custody of this individual, that they are responsible for this individual, but still it is the police who are intervening. So who's in charge here is a serious question in this matter. They give an order for the medication. They start to remove the restraints, and they notice he is not responding. He is not responsive. He may already be dead at this point. Next slide. They give him the medication, even though he is not responding, and he continues to not respond. As we say, he may already be dead at this point. The sheriff's deputies, the hospital staff roll him over onto his back, begin to take his vitals, begin to administer CPR. They call for EMTs, and the EMTs arrive. Next slide. And try life-saving measures for about a half an hour and then declare him dead. So the timeline that we've looked at here shows really the importance of doing everything we can to get law enforcement out of mental health treatment. Everything that law enforcement is trained to do is contrary to what is necessary for mental health response. They are trained to be intimidating, to be tough, to not back down, to never retreat. And this is always going to be contrary to appropriate mental health treatment. We've seen that the treatment that he received in the jail, and we go into it in more detail in the report, the treatment he received in the jail doesn't come anywhere close to meeting the minimum standards for behavioral health in jails. But the standards that you all endorse the creation of are voluntary. They're not mandatory standards. We've seen different places throughout this timeline where he was determined to need medical and mental health care and was prevented from getting that. Time and time again, the CSB says he needs mental health treatment. He can't get it. He gets transported to the hospital, and the CSB says he needs mental health care and can't get it. And then maybe the I don't know, the sort of like well duh of all these things is we really need to eliminate the use of prone restraints. Prone restraints are almost guaranteed to be deadly. And so that restraint technique should be eliminated in all settings, in correctional facilities, in hospitals, in crisis centers, prone restraints. I mean, we've seen it nationwide, what happens when prone restraints are used. I think that's the end of my presentation. I don't know if anyone from the Department of Behavioral Health is here, but I think some of the questions that you may have for me, it'd be great if we could engage them in a future discussion on it. Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Question from Delegate Sickles.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very disturbing report. Ms. Miller, we've worked together on many things before, and you know that we've been trying to work on this area mean, this is not something we don't know that we are not up to 100% on. Law enforcement is getting training in many places. Maybe it's not uniform. I don't know what happened in Henrico, but they're training law enforcement every day to deal with people that have serious mental illness, and they need to have the appropriate training. I just want to say that. And as far as professional staff, we don't have them. When we're trying to fund psychiatric residencies, incentivize people to become LCSWs. There's a shortage of all these mental health workers, as you know about.
Right.
And we would hire them. We have openings. We have 40 openings at the Northern Virginia Mental Health Institute now, and so we have. I'm surprised it's only 158 ready for discharge, to tell you the truth.
Right.
But this committee has put a lot of money into permanent supportive housing. That's to attack this problem. We have got to have housing or they can't leave the hospital.
That's right.
They shouldn't be in these situations, so we're working on this. I don't know why the CSB in Henrico also doesn't have their own professional staff. You said you can't find anyone to give them a TDO. They don't have their own internal psychiatrist or advanced practice psychiatric nurse, or why don't they have professional staff in there? And I'll just leave it at that, and I could go on, but.
I'm sorry if I misspoke. I did not mean to imply that the CSB didn't have professional staff. They did have evaluators, professional evaluators meet with Mr. Otieno.
Okay.
I apologize if I misspoke about that.
Yeah, just I guess I would say these issues we have in Northern Virginia. We're trying to establish crisis response centers. That's another big effort of this committee and nonpartisan effort. And we have a hard time even opening them. We have one now in Northern Virginia in Western Fairfax that serves Loudoun and Prince William. And the police, they don't want to be dealing with this themselves. This is not something they want to do. So they drop people having a psychotic experience at the facility. They don't go to jail anymore. I mean, the fact that we're taking them to jail is a problem that we've got to solve, and we're working on a long-term solution for this problem. So we would gear this up faster if we could. And on another issue that you're concerned with intellectually disabled population, we have a huge budget here to take care of the ones that are in the most crisis, and nobody believes that we can implement 3,440 new waivers in this 2 years. And it's partly because we have the same workforce problem I mentioned earlier. We just don't have people willing and able to do this work, especially for what we pay. So these are complicated issues, and we want to work with you to help solve them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Delegate Hodges.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being with us today. You mentioned that the hospital never received the initial TDO, which is concerning, and then a second TDO was issued. Where was the breakdown in that process? Because then they would have started looking for a psychiatric, hospital immediately then, and there may have been something available at that time. So I'm just wondering where that breakdown was and why the hospital never received that initial TDO.
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Hodges, thank you. That's a great question. I'm not sure what that breakdown was. We've seen in other situations where orders are issued. We can remember cases, the case a few years ago of Jamichael Mitchell, who was ordered to treatment, and the jail never got that order, and that resulted in his death as well. So I'm not sure where that breakdown was. We can look at that and see if we can figure that out.
Delegate Willett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Miller, thank you. This is just an incredibly difficult task. I was not sure who was going to be tasked with doing this type of report. I didn't realize that fell on you, and I really appreciate you taking on just an incredibly difficult job. This was a tragedy at every level, and it seems like every turn there was a failure. I do echo Vice Chairman Sickles' remarks that we are certainly putting money towards the problem. That's not the only answer here. We did pass Ivo's law. Senator Bagby and I carried Ivo's law this past session, which is enabling a family member or someone close to a patient to be with them, and in this case, to have provided information about his medical needs, which was never conveyed. Ivo's mom never got a chance to provide that medication. That may not solve all the problems here, but I think, in my opinion, would have helped with some of those, so at least we've addressed that. But it's such an unfortunate, just the worst situation, and it's also unfortunate that we have to have these terrible situations to inspire action. But I do think we were taking action before Ivo's terrible death. We're certainly going to take more. And I just want to thank you for doing just an incredibly difficult job, but hopefully that will inspire more action by us. Thank you.
Delegate McQuinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and Ms. Miller, thank you for bringing before us and making certain that we are aware of some of the dynamics of this most unfortunate situation that had occurred. I actually, in the end of this month, will be having a town hall meeting with sheriff departments as well as others who have been affected by mental illness and how they are coping and whatnot. So this is very much on the minds of a lot of people. But the reality is, I mean, as it relates to what happened, it was so many things that went wrong.
Right.
You know, so many things that people were not equipped to handle.
Right.
You know, the jails, police department, and sheriffs, and they should not be. And I feel in many ways we have put them in this situation where they are trying to address, I guess, maybe public safety and some other issues, but they are not equipped to do it. And the jails are just, you know, I talk often to my sheriffs and those who are sheriffs in the city of Richmond, in Henrico County, and about these issues. And they're on overload with individuals who have mental health challenges, having mental health crisis, and they really don't have a clue what to do with them. And when they're trying to connect and find the necessary support, that's another element that they are being challenged by. So it is, we have been doing a lot. This has been, I think I came in 2009, and we were discussing at that time and trying to help address some of the mental health challenges. I thought we were moving in a direction where we were doing much better, and I think we have been. It's been very much individuals, General Assembly members who have been very sensitive to this issue. We do need to do more as we look at what is happening, so something like this will not happen again. So thank you again for your work. But it is something that all of us must get at the table and try to bring some greater resolution to this. And I don't think it's going to happen swiftly. It is going to be some years to get to where we are trying to go. Thank you.
Delegate Austin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I would just like to echo what Delegate Sickles and Delegate McQuinn have said. This board and this legislature take this issue very seriously. It is a tragedy. I've never felt that mentally ill people should be incarcerated. I think it's not the proper setting for them. Although, as Delegate McQuinn said, this is a very, very complex situation. I just want to assure you that your concerns are not going unfounded. Delegate Sickles is very passionate about mental health, behavioral health, and mental illness, and he works tirelessly to try to find a solution and an effort toward resolving the problem and putting the proper safeguards in place. We thank you for what you do for trying to look after the mentally ill and mental health in the Commonwealth. But I thank you kindly, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Mr. Chair.
Delegate Corner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I think the one piece out of the bed availability is the unavailability of housing in our community. And, you know, we heard this at Central State when Behavioral Health Commission visited, that they have individuals who are awaiting stable housing in the community. They're, they either don't have family and their families are not capable of providing that care. And we overheard the overlap of substance use disorders and mental health disease, and the need for not only supportive housing, but also clean and sober housing in recovery community. Right. And, Housing Commission is looking at the housing aspect of really, one, a discrimination against housing in our communities if your family unit doesn't look like someone else's family unit. And we have to tackle that discrimination piece in neighborhoods to allow. And then two, it is really hard to find affordable housing right now. Perhaps that's one of the things that we need to look at is taking up some housing stock in various communities in order to provide those beds, going a more aggressive approach in our affordable neighborhoods. But this is the fourth commission in a month that the issue of housing out in the community, and it's not just adults. When we looked at Commission on Youth and State Executive Council for Children's Services, we are at an all-time high of families whose kids end up in emergency beds in our psychiatric facilities. And then families, when the facilities, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little choked up, say that they are ready to go back home, and parents are like, I can't take them. I can't do it. And our children are sitting in beds, and there's no housing alternative if families won't come back and get them. So, that housing piece, it's a discrimination piece, but it's also the lack of affordable housing stock for folks who might provide that housing for individuals to free up these beds.
That's right.
Ms. Miller, thank you so very much for coming and sharing with us today. As the members of the committee have indicated, this is an area and an issue that is certainly on our radar screen, and I'm sure when we return to the General Assembly, we will continue to do our very best to address this and other issues that impacted the humanity of us all. So I thank you so very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
We do appreciate the efforts that the legislature has put into various pieces of the solution, and we look forward to continuing to work with the legislature in the coming year.
Thank you. Before we adjourn, we have one last housekeeping note. Members of the committee, if you have not responded to staff in regards to attending our Appropriations retreat in November, please let them know if you plan to be in attendance in November for our, and Andrea has forms if you need them, so please respond so that we may continue to plan appropriately. And that is all that we have to come before the committee. The committee shall rise.